Christopher Columbus, a name etched in history, celebrated in textbooks, monuments, and holidays, but how much of what we think we know is actually true? Was he truly the brave explorer who discovered the Americas, or is there a deeper, darker story hiding beneath the surface? Let's start at the beginning. To truly understand the man who would change the course of history, we must first look at his origins, where he came from, and what shaped his ambitions. Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy, in 1451, a bustling port city, alive with trade cultures. Chobe Maichuan. And that it funds their constant movement of ships. The city's narrow streets and vibrant markets were filled with the sounds of merchants and sailors from across the Mediterranean. But even here the story's clouded in uncertainty. Records from the time are scarce, and much of what we know is pieced together from fragments, letters, rumors, and faded documents. Some claim he was poor, a simple sailor who learned the ways of the sea through hard work and perseverance, driven by dreams of adventure and discovery. Others suggest he had connections, perhaps even noble blood or influential friends, that would later open doors to the powerful Spanish crown, giving him opportunities most could only imagine. These conflicting accounts raise important questions, because history is often written by those in power, and the truth can be shaped to fit the needs of those telling the story. The details of Columbus's early life remain a puzzle, open to interpretation and debate. In the end, the line between hero and opportunist can be razor thin, and understanding his beginnings helps us see the man behind the legend. Columbus's famous voyage in 1492 is often portrayed as a triumphant crossing of the Atlantic, a daring adventure that changed the course of history forever. The image of his ships braving uncharted waters, guided only by the stars and a sense of destiny, has become legendary. But the reality of that journey is far more complex and intriguing than the simple story we often hear. Consider this: despite the courage and determination it took to make the crossing, Columbus never actually realized he had reached a completely new continent. He sailed into the unknown, but his understanding of where he had landed was deeply flawed. In fact, Columbus was convinced he had found islands just off the coast of Asia, believing he was close to the riches of the East. He mapped his discoveries as if they were part of Asia, never suspecting the existence of an entirely separate landmass. Yet, despite this fundamental misunderstanding, history has long credited Columbus with discovering the Americas. His name is celebrated in monuments, textbooks, and museums around the world. So, why has this narrative endured for centuries? Perhaps it's because the story of Columbus was carefully crafted to serve a purpose, a narrative that glorifies Europe's expansion and frames the encounter as a moment of heroic discovery, rather than a complex and contested chapter in world history. Long before Columbus set sail, the Americas were home to millions of people, sophisticated societies, cities, trade routes, advanced cultures thriving for centuries. So who really discovered these lands? The answer isn't as simple as textbooks suggest. Let's take a closer look at the myth of Columbus as a hero, a story many of us learned in school, but one that deserves a deeper examination. For generations, Columbus has been celebrated as a fearless explorer who changed the course of history. But is that the whole truth? According to legend, he was courageous, persistent, and visionary, a man who braved the unknown seas and opened up a new world. Statues and monuments across continents honor his name, and his image is often cast in a heroic light. But when we turn to historical records and first-hand accounts, a much more complicated and troubling story begins to emerge, one that challenges the simple narrative we've been told. On his voyages, Columbus and his men were involved in acts of brutality, forced labor, and violence against the indigenous people they encountered. These were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that left deep scars on entire civilizations. So, is it possible that this darker side of history was downplayed or even deliberately erased over centuries in order to create the image of a national hero? As we dig deeper, we must ask, whose stories have been left out, and why? Think about it. Monuments stand in his honor, holidays celebrate his voyages, but what message does that send when the reality includes oppression and exploitation? Are we celebrating discovery, or rewriting history to suit a narrative of conquest? And yet Columbus's journeys were undeniably impactful. They triggered an exchange of ideas, goods, and sadly, diseases that reshaped the world. But at what cost? Millions of indigenous lives lost, cultures disrupted, ecosystems forever changed. Can we still call this discovery? Then there's the question of Columbus's own character. Historical letters reveal a man ambitious, cunning, even ruthless. He lobbied tirelessly for royal support, often exaggerating promises of gold and riches. How much of history is fact, and how much is spin? Could Columbus be one of history's first great self-promoters, rewriting the narrative even in his own time? And yet, history remembers him as the gateway to the New World. But here's an unsettling question. Why not the Vikings, who arrived centuries earlier, or the countless indigenous explorers who had already mapped these lands? Why does one man get immortalized while others remain footnotes? Some argue that the myth of Columbus serves a purpose beyond storytelling. It's about creating a sense of origin, a narrative of exploration and progress, conveniently ignoring the human cost. History, after all, isn't just about events, it's about power, who writes it, and who benefits. Modern historians challenge the heroic narrative. They emphasize the suffering caused by his voyages, from forced labor to the spread of deadly diseases. And yet, in schools, in popular culture, Columbus is still celebrated. Why? Perhaps because, myths are easier to teach than uncomfortable truths. So, what is the truth about Columbus? He was a navigator, yes, a skilled sailor, ambitious and persistent, but he was also deeply flawed, complicit in actions we would now call crimes against humanity. The man and the myth are not the same, and understanding the difference matters more than we might think. Here's the conspiracy of history. Myths are comforting. They create heroes, inspire pride, and justify actions. But history itself? History is messy, complex, and often uncomfortable. Columbus's story reminds us to question everything, to look beneath the surface, and to challenge the narratives we are handed. So, when we ask, who was Christopher Columbus, we must also ask, who made him a hero? And perhaps, the more important question, what truths are still hidden in the shadows of history, just waiting for someone to uncover them? Across the Americas, perspectives vary. For some, Columbus Day is a day of pride, and for others, it's a reminder of loss and suffering. And maybe that's the most important lesson here. History isn't just one story, it's, many stories competing, clashing, and really challenging us to think a bit deeper. The myth of Columbus serves as a mirror. It shows us how societies choose their heroes, how narratives are crafted, and honestly, how truth can be hidden behind legend. If we don't question the stories we're told, who will? So, the next time you hear the tale of Christopher Columbus, just remember, discovery is not always heroism, and history is not always truth. It's a story, sometimes written for power, sometimes for pride, but always worth questioning. Christopher Columbus, the man, the myth, the mystery. What do you believe?